welcome to the MudRoom, our weekly Uncommon Sense parenting class. How is everyone today? I just got back from Chicago. I was visiting my friend and mentor to celebrate her 50th birthday, and oh my God, it was so nice to leave my house. Which I know makes me sound like a hermit, but to be fair, for the last 2 years, I have pretty much been a hermit. The furthest that I've ventured out of my house is my mother's house in Ottawa, and I've had my children with me the entire time. I don't think I've gotten more than 2 days in a row away from my children since March of 2020. So to leave them with their dad, get on a plane, fly out of the country, rent a car, hang out with adults for a couple of days. Like, we went to a fancy restaurant. I didn't have to remind anyone to eat their food or leave early because someone was tired. And then I got to fly home on my own, and it was just so far overdue. And of course, now I have the travel bug, and I cannot wait to do it again. All right, so our topic today is autism. I'm not sure where the recent surge in concern about autism has come from, because it's not exactly new, but I've been getting a lot more questions about early signs of autism and what to do if you suspect your child may be autistic. So I figured we could go through what I generally look for as red flags, with the heavy caveat that these are just red flags, okay? They aren't a diagnosis. A lot of indicators of autism are also just developmentally appropriate to typical children, and children aren't robots. They don't level up. So not all babies and toddlers who show these signs will be diagnosed as autistic. They can grow out of them. What makes them signs of autism is that they are still present past the time we would typically see them. So when we're screening our kids for autism, it's important that we document our observations and share them with our healthcare providers regularly, okay? Before we get into it, however, I'd like to introduce myself to those of you who are new. Hi, my name is Alana Robinson. I'm a parenting coach for parents of toddlers, preschoolers, and kindergartners, and I help you understand why your children are misbehaving and how to fix it without yelling, shaming, or timeouts. I'm your host here on the MudRoom. I'm also the host of the Parenting Posse Facebook group, and I'm the creator of the Parentability program, where I help you raise well-behaved kids of your own. Say hi, make sure you like the video, and drop any comments that you have. Those of you who are listening on the podcast, I would really appreciate a review if you have the time. All right, let's get started. So as I said, a lot of indicators of autism can also be totally typical. It's mostly about when they show up and how long they stick around. Typically, autism is diagnosed around the age of 2-ish at the earliest. Some kids can be diagnosed earlier than that, and lots of kids are diagnosed much later. But the reason it's generally around 2-ish is because that's when some of the clear differentiators in observable development become apparent. I am again going to note that none of these things are definitive, okay? They're simply signs that more investigation needs to take place. One of the earliest indicators is that your baby doesn't track you with their eyes. Not that they can't, but more that they don't. So if you walk from one side of the room to the other, they don't follow you with their eyes. If you're facing them and your face is moving in and across their field of vision, they won't track your face. They're often more interested in a static object than following the social movements in the room. Lack of babbling and lack of smiling are two more that are typically present by about 3 months. Typically developing babies, once they can smile, will generally smile back if smiled at by a familiar person. I had a mom recently who was very concerned because her daughter never smiled at strangers. So I asked her if she smiled at familiar people like mom, dad, grandparents, or care providers. And she was like, oh yeah. I was like, okay. It's something worth keeping an eye on, And if you're still concerned, totally mention it to your doctor. But if she does typically smile back when a familiar person smiles at her, this likely doesn't apply. Once we get to about 7 months, babies should be engaging in what's called joint attention. So you look at something, and they follow your gaze to look at it. And then they look back and forth between you and the thing to make sure that you're both looking at the same thing. And usually, they'll try to share that experience with you. They'll smile at you, or they'll make a face at the object or person that you're both looking at. If they aren't, that can be a concern. Typically, developing children will also do what's called referencing, which is similar to joint attention in that they're both doing that back and forth thing, but generally it's in the context of something new. So when they walk into a room with mom and they see a bunch of unfamiliar faces, and then they look at mom to see how she's reacting to the new people, if mom's positive about it, then they're like, okay, I'm safe. If mom seems uncomfortable or stressed, baby protests. Kiddos who are autistic often won't do that referencing. They won't look to their caregiver to make sure a situation is safe before proceeding into it. This is where that autistic kids aren't social stereotype comes from, and I'll say right now that it's pure bullshit. The autistic children I know, many of whom are now young adults, which is just a little bit mind-blowing. Anyways, pretty much all the autistic children that I know have all been some of the most social people I have ever met. They just don't socialize in the same way. So games of peekaboo won't hold their attention, or they often won't try to get your attention by looking at you or gesturing to you. Hi, come here, look at this. They won't do that. Once we get to a year, if they aren't pointing to share information with you, look, want, give, right? They want something on the high shelf, and they aren't attempting to point to gather your help to get it. They aren't using basic gestures like waving. They aren't using single word or word approximations. Word approximations are attempts at saying a word. So it doesn't really matter if your baby isn't saying ball. But if you show them a ball, or you point at a ball, if they attempt it, like saying ba, that counts as saying a word. If they aren't making attempts, that can be a concern. Between a year and 2 years is when we see the most concrete signs. They may not be walking. They may have less than 15 words by 18 months. And again, these don't have to be perfect round words. They're attempts. They aren't attempting to put 2 words together. Again, this doesn't have to be perfect, but again, using the example of a ball, if you show them a ball, will they say, "Ba-pee? For ball, please?" If not, that can be a concern. If they aren't responding to their name, so you call their name and they don't turn their head to acknowledge you in any way, shape, or form. They don't attempt to imitate you. So if you pick up a ball and bounce it and then hand it to them, do they try and do it too? They don't have to be successful. Do they try? In my early intervention days, I remember doing a diagnostic observation with a little one, and I was in the room trying to engage him, and his mom and the clinician were behind one-way glass in the other room. And I had this silly putty that I was playing with, and it was super stretchy, and I was showing him how to pull it and twist it and squish it so it made kind of fart noises, and he was really into it. He was watching what my hands were doing very closely. But when I handed him the putty, he made zero attempt to do it himself. In fact, he pushed it right back into my hand and kind of grunted at me, and then he started stomping his feet, think of the typical 2-year-old "Arr!" And when I prompted him, do it again, he just got more upset and stomped harder. At no point during this exchange did he look at me. And now, we're not talking about like hard eye contact. Again, this is like one of those stereotypes. But at no point did he ever look at my face. Did he ever try and reference my visual cues? He kept his eyes on the putty the whole time. He made no attempt to do what I was doing, even though it was clear that he very much wanted me to do it again. They may also start engaging in echolalia, which is repeating phrases that you say or that they hear on TV or in movies with the same tone of voice and cadence. So like they'll say, "What's behind the door?" And it's clear that that's not their voice, you know? Kids who engage in a lot of echolalia are often also Gestalt language processors, so they actually learn language more as whole sentences or phrases versus individual words. Over or underreacting to sensory input can be another sign. They either are looking for the input all the time or they avoid it. So they either overreact to loud noises or they're not aware that there's big booms happening. They don't like new textures or they love them and they can't get enough of them, right? There's very little in between. So what should you do if you're noticing these signs in your child? Document them. Get a little notebook, write down what you're observing, what day and time you noticed it. Once you have some observations written down, and I'm talking like a couple weeks to a month, not just like 1 or 2 days, make an appointment with your child's doctor and share your observations with them and ask for a screening. There are several clinical screenings that are parent questionnaires, and then based off of that information, the doctor will decide your next steps. What happens from there varies widely depending on where you live, so it's always best to connect with a local group that can guide you through the process, because usually it can get kind of complicated and confusing. Remember, if your child is autistic, they have always been autistic. The diagnosis doesn't change who they are. They're still your baby, exactly as they've always been. All the diagnosis does is give you a better understanding of how their brain is developing, what their needs are, and access to supports for you and for them. Early intervention is key, so the sooner you get a diagnosis, the better. Don't be scared of it. I hope that gives you some ideas for what to look out for. As always, if you've got questions, don't hesitate to ask either in the comments or in the parenting posse. We have tons of parents who have kiddos on the spectrum in our community, and they're always very generous with sharing their knowledge and experiences and connections. So the link for that is in the description. Have a fantastic week, everyone, and I will see you next week for another Uncommon Sense Parenting class. Bye!